welcome to Talk It Out with me, Li Jingjing. On March the 9th, an open letter signed by several veteran journalists, filmmakers, and artists opposing Ofcom's decision to revoke CGTN's broadcasting license was published. So today I invited a special guest, Fiona Edwards. She is among the signatories in the open letter.
Yeah, well, I think at the moment of increasing global tensions, the threat of this Cold War from the United States against China, I think it's really important that we have dialogue, discussion, and hear really fundamentally from what China thinks about the world. So I think it's very dangerous to basically cut off hearing from CGTN and that Chinese perspective. It's dangerous for the world, it's dangerous for the British people. And it's also completely hypocritical. The reasoning that was given by the British authorities to cut off CGTN is that CGTN is a Chinese state broadcaster. But this is very well known. This isn't some secret. It's very widely known and publicly acknowledged. And there's many state broadcasters which have a political agenda that are allowed to broadcast in Britain, and that includes the BBC. The BBC is controlled by the British state. All of the employees for BBC, apart from cleaning staff, have been vetted by military security intelligence services for decades. So it seems very hypocritical that other countries have TV stations broadcasting in Britain, which are controlled by political bodies, but that China's voice is going to be excluded from the conversation.
How do you feel about media in Britain?
Well, I think particularly from the point of view of the issue on China and this threat of a new Cold War, I think that there's an increasing censorship of different perspectives and ideas, and this attack on CGTN is an example of that. But in mainstream newspapers, on most of the TV, you just hear negative stories about China all the time, and there's not an attempt to balance that out and hear it from a different perspective, and for people to be able to make up their own minds based on lots of different information. I would say there's a lot of censorship taking place in the West at the moment.
Okay, so if you guys are not watching CGTN, when you only watch exclusively from media like BBC or The Guardian or this British media, how do you feel about their reports about China? Like, do you feel the news stories about China they report are mostly positive or negative?
Overwhelmingly negative stories about China, and I think this is one of the issues that I think we have, is that we should be in a dialogue and a discussion with China, finding out what's really happening, because I think in a situation where you have aggression, like Britain is sending its aircraft carrier to the South China Sea at the moment, it's increasing military spending in order to provide funds for these sorts of provocative military escapades against China. I think at such a moment, it's really important to hear what the Chinese perspective on the world is, so that dangerous decisions aren't made, that people aren't basing their judgments without actually knowing the real information. But I also think from the point of view of the British people, if you take the coronavirus pandemic, we're suffering a lot at the moment because of that. Over 125,000 people in Britain have died, and British population is 65 million. So, for example, just on the level of learning from how China dealt with the coronavirus, we could benefit a lot from that. So I think the fact that CGTN being taken off air takes away an opportunity to learn from those sorts of experiences, but also the fact that a lot of the British media are going along with demonizing China, attacking China in order to build up public support for a Cold War is very dangerous, because it's not accurate or balanced.
So on this topic, I have another guest to share his opinions. He is Carlos Martinez. He is the organizer of the No Cold War campaign.
I think we recognize that the removal of CGTN's broadcast license it's a political act. It's another thing that forms part of British foreign policy and the Cold War on China. It's got nothing to do with Ofcom's rules. We know that because there are lots of state-owned broadcasters that continue to have a license in the UK. The most obvious example being the BBC, which is accountable to the British government. And there are several other state-run television stations that operate in Britain, including from France, from South Korea, from Japan, and so on. Another state broadcaster that did have its license removed a few years ago is Press TV, the Iranian TV station. So if we're looking for a pattern of which countries have their licenses removed, it seems to be those countries that Britain has political tensions with. You know, it's not around whether countries have violated some rule or not. So in other words, Ofcom isn't acting independently itself. It's acting as an extension of the British government and Britain's foreign relations. It's participating in the new Cold War in basically a rather crude and blundering way that hurts Britain's reputation, and it hurts Britain's self-image. Britain thinks of itself as a democratic country, as a country that supports freedom of speech, but removing CGTN's license is a clear violation of free speech, and it harms the British population because it means that British people don't have access to an alternative voice. CGTN was one of the very few voices in the British media sphere that gave a positive and at least a more realistic portrayal of what happens in China. So instead of promoting understanding between the British people and the Chinese people, we're promoting misunderstanding between Britain and China, which is kind of obviously a bad idea. And it's hardly a coincidence that in the last few weeks, aside from revoking CGTN's broadcast license, Britain has also dispatched its Navy ships to the South China Sea in a statement of support, essentially for NATO and for the US's China encirclement strategy, which itself is a very irresponsible, a hostile act and a threat to peace. You know, I wonder what the British public's response would be if Chinese warships came into British waters, just off the coast of London. Furthermore, the British government last year acted in accordance with Mike Pompeo's instructions and decided to remove Huawei from Britain's 5G infrastructure, in spite of the fact that investigations showed that Huawei wasn't using its equipment for any kind of illegal or nefarious purposes. You know, they researched it and they proved that Huawei wasn't attempting to compromise British security. Meanwhile, the British government has been interfering in Chinese internal affairs by offering residency to BNO passport holders in Hong Kong and supporting separatism in Hong Kong. So we've got this series of hostile acts perpetrated by the British government against China. And these are part of this new Cold War, which is designed by the US, it's led by the US. But, you know, as I said before, in the wake of Brexit, Britain feels like it needs to prove its loyalty to the US to try and get a good trade deal to improve its economic relationship. You know, it's very unfortunate and it's short-sighted. You know, it makes such obvious sense for Britain to cultivate good relations with China. China's going to be a crucial source of investment for Britain. It's a major export market for Britain. You know, if anything's going to save British manufacturing after Brexit, it's 400, 500 million middle-income Chinese people. And that's a relationship that China's putting on the table. This is what China wants. This is what China wants to make available, a win-win relationship where we can trade, where we can have people-to-people exchanges, and generally deepen our understanding, and both sides benefit mutually. But Britain, as it stands, is rejecting that offer, which is a shame and ultimately a mistake.